Let me start by saying this, because somebody listening right now needs to hear it. You didn't lose because you cared. You didn't lose because you loved too deeply. And you didn't lose because you weren't enough. You're tired because you've been holding on to something that stopped holding you back. And that kind of tiredness doesn't come from weakness. It comes from effort without return. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she realizes that love shouldn't feel like pressure, confusion, or constant self-doubt. Love shouldn't require you to chase clarity or beg for consistency. Yet so many women stay stuck, believing that if they just say the right thing, wait a little longer or love a little harder, everything will change. But here's the truth most people don't tell you. Real connection doesn't grow under force. It grows under choice. Today we're talking about a different kind of strength, not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, grounded power of letting go peacefully. Because when you release someone without anger, without manipulation, and without fear, something shifts. Not just in him, but in you. You stop operating from anxiety and start moving from self-respect. And that energy is felt whether words are spoken or not. This isn't about playing games or pretending not to care. It's about understanding that sometimes the most powerful message you can send is silence backed by dignity. When you stop chasing, stop proving, and stop forcing outcomes, you create space for truth to rise. And truth always reveals what's real. So if you're holding on right now, questioning your worth, wondering if walking away means losing everything, listen closely. Letting go peacefully doesn't mean you lose. It means you finally choose yourself. And that choice changes everything. Men don't feel loss in the moment. They feel it in silence. Let me tell you something most people don't understand about men. When a relationship begins to slip, when a woman pulls back, when communication slows down, men don't immediately feel heartbreak. They don't sit on the edge of the bed wondering what went wrong. They don't replay conversations right away. In fact, in the beginning, it almost feels like relief. Less talking, less explaining, less emotional responsibility. To a man, the early stage of silence feels like peace. And that's why so many women get confused. They think if he really cared, he'd feel this right now. But that's not how men are wired. See, women experience loss up front. When something changes, a woman feels it immediately in her chest. She senses distance before it even becomes visible. She tries to fix it, talk about it, understand it. Men are different. Men don't process emotionally in real time. They process through experience. And at first, silence doesn't feel like loss to a man. It feels like space. It feels like breathing room. It feels like freedom from pressure. So in that moment, when you stop calling, stop checking in, stop explaining how you feel, he doesn't panic. He assumes everything will settle. He assumes you'll come back around. He assumes the connection is still there, just quieter. And because of that assumption, he doesn't act. He doesn't reach out. He doesn't fight. Not because he doesn't care, but because he doesn't yet feel the cost. But here's where the shift happens. Time passes. Days go by. And slowly something starts to feel off. Not dramatic, not obvious, just empty. The routines he didn't notice before suddenly stand out. The text he expected but never admitted he needed doesn't come. The familiar presence that grounded him is gone. And that's when silence stops feeling like freedom and starts feeling like absence. Men don't feel lost when the door closes. They feel it when the room stays quiet. Silence forces a man to sit with himself. No distractions, no reassurance, no emotional safety net. And that's uncomfortable because now he has space to think. And in that space, memories start rising up. Moments he dismissed, efforts he underestimated, love he assumed would always be there. Silence gives those memories volume. It plays them back when there's nothing else to listen to. This is why peaceful detachment is so powerful. When you don't leave angry, there's no fight to focus on. When you don't leave crying, there's no guilt to avoid. When you don't leave begging, there's no ego boost. All that's left is stillness. And stillness doesn't distract, it reveals. In that silence, a man begins to realize something important. He didn't lose you because you stopped loving him. He lost you because he stopped showing up. And that realization doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in quietly, late at night in the middle of a random day, during moments when he wishes he could share something with you and suddenly remembers you're not there anymore. That's when the questions start. Why didn't I do more? Why did I think she'd always stay? Was I too comfortable? These questions don't come when emotions are high. They come when things are calm, because calm gives clarity. And here's the part many women don't realize: your silence is not empty. It's loud. It speaks without words. It tells him you reached your limit without screaming. It tells him you valued your peace more than proving your point. And that kind of strength leaves a mark. A man may not chase in the moment you step back, but in the quiet, he feels the weight of what he lost, because men don't feel lost in chaos. They feel it when there's nothing left to distract them from the truth. And that truth is simple but powerful. When your presence is gone and your peace remains intact, a man finally understands what he had and what it cost him to lose it. Peaceful detachment triggers a man's self-reflection. Let me explain. Something that changes everything once you understand it. Men do not truly reflect when emotions are loud. They reflect when things get quiet, when there's arguing, defending, explaining, or constant emotional back and forth. A man stays in reaction mode. He's not listening to understand. He's listening to respond. He's focused on protecting his ego, not examining his behavior. That's why so many conversations go nowhere. But when you detach peacefully, you remove the noise. And in that silence, a man finally has to face himself. When you don't argue your point anymore, when you stop demanding answers, when you stop pushing for clarity, something unsettling happens for him. There's no conflict to blame, no emotions to point at, no words to twist. You didn't slam the door. You didn't make a scene. You simply step back with calm energy and self-respect. And that's exactly what triggers self-reflection in a man, because now the mirror is clear. Anger gives him an excuse. Tears give him justification. Chaos gives him a story he can tell himself about why things ended. But peace gives him nowhere to hide. When a woman walks away calmly, a man can't say she was too much. He can't say she pushed me away. He can't say I had no choice. All he sees is a woman who loved him and chose herself without bitterness. That kind of exit stays with a man. Peaceful detachment forces a man to replay moments on his own terms. Not because you asked him to, but because his mind won't let it go. He starts remembering times you were patient when he was distant, times you tried to communicate without raising your voice, times you waited for change that never came. And the reason this reflection hurts is because it's honest. There's no emotional fog to blur the truth. He sees his effort clearly, or the lack of it. Men struggle with accountability when they feel attacked. But when no one is attacking them, accountability becomes unavoidable. Your calm withdrawal creates a psychological pause. It disrupts his usual narrative. Instead of seeing himself as the victim or the hero, he has to see himself as a participant. And once a man realizes he played a role in losing someone valuable, that realization cuts deep. Another powerful part of peaceful detachment is that it challenges a man's sense of control. Many men unconsciously assume that if things get bad, the woman will fight harder, explain more, stay longer. When you don't do that, it shakes his assumptions. He starts questioning what he thought was guaranteed. And when something you thought was permanent suddenly disappears without drama, it creates a lasting impact. Silence combined with dignity lingers. He may go days or weeks without reaching out, but internally the reflection continues. It shows up when he's alone, when he's driving, when he's doing something ordinary and realizes he can't share it with you anymore. That's when he asks himself the hardest questions. Why didn't I appreciate her? Why did I wait until she was gone? Why did I think she would always stay? This is not manipulation. This is cause and effect. Peaceful detachment doesn't try to teach him a lesson. It allows life to teach it. You didn't force insight, you created space for it. And that space is where growth happens if he's capable of it. What's important to understand is that self-reflection doesn't always lead to action. Sometimes a man realizes what he lost too late. Sometimes the awareness comes after the opportunity has passed, but the reflection still happens, and that reflection changes him in ways arguments never could. So when you choose peace over chaos, silence over pleading, and self-respect over emotional exhaustion, you're not being weak. You're being powerful in the quietest way possible. Because peaceful detachment doesn't just end a chapter, it opens a man's eyes to the truth he avoided when you were still there. When you stop proving your worth, he starts measuring as, let me slow this down and tell you something real, because this is where most people misunderstand power. Men do not grow through confrontation the way women think they do. They don't suddenly become self-aware because you explained yourself better, cried harder, or argued your point with more logic. In fact, the more emotional noise there is, the more a man retreats into defense mode. He stops listening and starts protecting his ego. That's why peaceful detachment hits so differently. It removes the battlefield and leaves him alone with his thoughts. When you detach calmly, without bitterness or drama, you take away his ability to shift blame. There's no angry exit for him to point to, no emotional explosion to justify his distance. You didn't accuse him. You didn't chase him. You didn't try to win the argument. You simply stepped back with dignity, and that creates discomfort because now the story in his head changes. Instead of thinking, she pushed me away, he starts wondering, why did she stop trying? Peaceful detachment forces a man to confront silence that isn't empty, but intentional. It tells him you reached a place of clarity, not exhaustion. That message is unsettling because clarity suggests decision. And men feel the weight of decisions when they realize they're no longer in control of the outcome. When you stop reacting, he can't predict your next move. And unpredictability makes him reflect. In that space, his mind starts replaying moments he once ignored, conversations he brushed off, effort he delayed, promises he assumed he had time to keep. He starts noticing the small things you used to do that made life smoother, warmer, more stable. Not because you reminded him, but because your absence highlighted them. Peace allows memory to surface without resistance. Men are often uncomfortable sitting with their own shortcomings, especially when someone else is no longer present to absorb them. When you detach peacefully, you're no longer cushioning his behavior with understanding or patience. He feels the consequences in quiet ways, misconnection, emotional distance, and the realization that someone who loved him chose peace over persistence. What really triggers self-reflection is that peaceful detachment challenges his identity. Many men see themselves as good partners simply because they didn't do anything wrong. But peace forces him to see that absence of harm is not presence of effort. He begins to ask himself if he truly showed up or merely occupied space. Those questions don't come during arguments. They come late at night when there's no one to reassure him. Another powerful element of peaceful detachment is that it denies him emotional feedback. No anger means no validation. No tears mean no guilt release. No pleading means no ego boost. He's left with neutrality, and neutrality is confronting. It doesn't praise him, and it doesn't condemn him. It simply reflects reality back to him. And reflection is where growth starts if he's willing to look. This kind of detachment also breaks patterns. Men often rely on predictable emotional cycles, tension, argument, reconciliation, repeat. When you step out of that loop quietly, the cycle collapses. He can't return to comfort as usual. He can't reset the situation with a simple apology or distraction. The familiar script no longer works, and when a script fails, reflection begins. Over time, the calm way you left becomes louder than any argument you could have had. It becomes the moment he remembers when he thinks about what went wrong. Not the fight, not the disagreement, but the day you stopped trying and didn't explain yourself. That's the moment that sticks because it was final without being cruel. Peaceful detachment doesn't guarantee a man will come back, but it guarantees something more important. He will understand. He will understand that love doesn't disappear in chaos. It leaves quietly when it's no longer nurtured. And that realization, once it settles in, changes how he sees you, how he sees relationships, and how he sees himself long after the silence begins. When you stop proving your worth, he starts measuring his, let me tell you, where many women lose their power without realizing it. It happens the moment you start proving your worth to someone who should already see it. You explain your value. You justify your feelings. You overgive, overextend, and overcompensate, hoping that if you show enough love, patience, and understanding, he'll finally choose you fully. But the truth is, the more you try to prove your worth, the less a man questions his own effort. Your effort covers the gap where his should have been. Men are not inspired by what is freely overgiven. They are shaped by what they have to rise up to meet. When you are constantly showing him why you're valuable, he never has to ask himself if he's enough for you. He stays comfortable because your consistency convinces him that no matter how little he does, you'll adjust. And that's not because he's evil. It's because human nature responds to patterns. The moment you stop proving, something changes. When you stop explaining why you deserve respect, when you stop reminding him of how much you give, when you stop filling every silence with effort, a space opens. And in that space, a question finally appears in his mind, am I doing enough? That question didn't exist before because your constant proving kept him from needing to ask it. Peacefully stepping back doesn't shout your worth. It assumes it. An assumption is powerful. It communicates that you no longer need external validation to stand firmly in who you are. That quiet confidence unsettles a man more than any argument ever could, because now he has to measure himself against the absence of your effort. When you were always available, he measured you by convenience. When you were always understanding, he measured you by tolerance. But when you stop proving, he measures himself by contribution. He starts noticing the imbalance. He begins to see that your presence wasn't automatic, it was generous. And generosity, once withdrawn, reveals what it was sustaining. Men often don't realize the full value of a woman until she stops compensating for what he didn't provide. When you no longer initiate every conversation, fix every emotional disconnect, or smooth over every rough edge, he feels the weight of his own inactivity. Not because you blamed him, but because you stopped covering for him. There's also something deeply psychological at work here. Men build identity through action. They feel worthy when they earn, pursue, and contribute. When you remove the need for him to show up, you also remove his opportunity to feel accomplished in the relationship. But when you step back and stop proving, you return that responsibility to him. And that responsibility forces evaluation. Now he has to ask himself questions he avoided before. Did I show consistency? Did I lead? Did I protect what mattered? Those questions don't arise when you're doing all the emotional labor. They arise when your effort is no longer carrying the connection. Stopping the need to prove doesn't make you cold. It makes you grounded. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop convincing. And that distinction changes everything, because love offered from strength invites respect, while love offered from insecurity invites complacency. A man may not say it out loud, but internally, he starts comparing who he was with you to who he needs to be to deserve you. And that comparison is uncomfortable. It exposes gaps he ignored. It shows him that you weren't asking for too much. You were asking him to rise. This is where power quietly returns to you. You're no longer auditioning for love. You're evaluating alignment. And when a man senses that shift, he either grows to meet it or fades away. When you stop proving your worth, you send a message without words. I know who I am, and I'm no longer negotiating my value. And in that moment, whether he admits it or not, a man finally starts measuring himself against the standard your absence created. Your growth without him is what shakes his confidence. Let me tell you why this part hits a man in a way nothing else does. A man can handle anger. He can handle tears. He can even handle silence for a while. But what he struggles with most is realizing that the woman he thought needed him didn't stop living when he stepped back. She didn't fall apart. She didn't pause her life. She didn't wait. She grew. And that growth without him quietly challenges everything he believed about his place in her world. When you start evolving without him, it disrupts a man's internal sense of importance, not in a cruel way, but in a real one. Many men unconsciously measure their value by the role they play in a woman's life. When he believes he is central, irreplaceable, or necessary, his confidence stays intact. But when he sees you becoming stronger, happier, more focused, and more fulfilled without his presence, it forces him to reevaluate that belief. Your growth creates a silent contrast. He remembers who you were when you were constantly trying to hold the relationship together. Tired, anxious, emotionally stretched. And then he sees who you are now, calmer, more self-assured, more at peace. That contrast is unsettling because it suggests that the relationship wasn't enhancing you, it was draining you. And no man likes realizing that he may have been a limitation rather than a support. Men often assume that when a woman loves deeply, she will struggle deeply without them. So when you redirect that love into yourself, your goals, your healing, your life, it shakes his assumptions. He begins to wonder if he misunderstood your strength. He starts asking himself whether you stayed because you needed him or because you chose him. And that distinction matters. Growth without him removes the illusion of dependency. You're no longer anchored to his attention, approval, or presence. And when a man realizes he is no longer the emotional center of your universe, his confidence takes a hit, not because he wants to control you, but because he's confronting a truth you were whole all along. This is where insecurity can surface. He starts comparing himself to the new version of you. The version that doesn't chase, doesn't wait, doesn't shrink. And comparison creates reflection. He wonders if he still fits into the life you're building. He wonders if he can meet you where you are now. And that question lingers because growth raises the standard without saying a word.